fifth grade, it's Mrs. Anglade, and today's lesson is going to be on percents for fourths and eighths. So before we start that lesson, I understand that my video kind of cut off yesterday. So let me make sure that you understand what happened yesterday with my two last questions. What I was saying in that last part of the video is that I shaded, or 1 out of every 5 was shaded, or 2 out of 10. 2 columns out of the 10 columns were shaded. Or if I just looked at half of the picture, 1 column out of every 5 columns were shaded, and it repeated again. 1 column out of every 5 columns were shaded. Just like over here, it was 3 out of every 5, and that pattern was repeated again, 3 out of every 5. Or if you counted them all together, it was 6 out of 10. And so where I was when the video cut off yesterday was right here. I was writing in the equivalent fractions for 3/5 with 60 hundredths or 6/10, and also 60% and then 1/5. Okay, so now that we have that, let's make sure we go back and look at this 1/4, the percent for 1/4. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was counting these little blocks, these little squares, it was really hard to count, like how many were there. So I finally found a pattern that there were 5 in that row, 5 more, 5 more, 5 more. But I want you to think about it. If we all agree that this was equivalent to 1/4, I want us to take a look at our 10 by 10 grids that you glued down in your journal today. And I want us to think about 1/4. If I was going to look at this 10 by 10 grid, can I think of another way to shade 1/4? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some different ways. Now, I don't want you to do what I do just yet. I don't want you to color anything in yet, because I'm going to show you some different ways to cut up these 100 squares into fourths. So I'm going to get my nice straight line drawing tool. And probably for most of you, what you would say is that, Mrs. Anglade, I would cut it in half vertically, I would cut it in half horizontally, and there I have 4 parts, right? Yeah, that would work. That would work. In fact, that's probably how I would do it. Okay, so don't color anything in yet. What I want you to see if you agree with, if I can cut it vertically and horizontally, some of you might say, well, this is a square, so could I cut it on its diagonals and still get the same amount? It's kind of hard to see, isn't it? But what do you think it's over here? How much do you think is shaded if I have 1 out of the 4 pieces that are shaded, and there's a 10 by 10 grid here, which is, we know 10 by 10 equals 100 squares, right? What do you think? What fraction of these 10 by 10 grids is shaded? Hopefully you said 25. Now you can go ahead and color it in. I just wanted to make sure that you knew both ways. But here's what I would do. I would probably shade in 1/4 of this, right? So that's probably what you would do. If you want to use the diagonals, by all means you can do that. Because you know what? I'm going to leave it like that for 3/4. Just because I'm a rebel like that, I'm going to leave it that way and see if we still get the answer that we're expecting. Okay, so 1/4. If 1/4 is shaded, right, what percent, 25 out of 100, and you heard me say in the video last night that 25 out of 100 per 100%, do you agree that that would be 25%? 25%? Just like, wasn't it that way yesterday, right? But the 25% looked a lot different, didn't it? But we still said it was 1 out of every 4, 1 out of every 4, 1 out of every 4. Here what we did when we shaded in is we did 1 big group out of the 4 groups in the entire group. We did it all at the same time. All right, so let's come back to this over here. Now, there's a reason I showed you these diagonals. You still agree that there's 4 equal parts here, right? Because fractions are all about equal parts. So it's a little harder to count, but do you still think that 1/4, I'm going to use this section over here because it's a little bit easier. Do you still think that this section that I'm looking at right here, do you still think that that's 25 squares? If you need to pause it right now, I'm not going to go through and count every one of these squares, but realize that, oh, that Squeak is my puppy dog coming into the office. These two would be a full square. These two put together would be a full square. These put together would be a full square. These put together, oops, would be a full square. And these put together would be a full square, right? So if you want to pause it and if you want to go through and count to make sure that there's 25 full squares there, by all means, please do. But I have 15 minutes time to record. I don't have that time to go through and count. Okay, so in any case, we agree, not agree. Let's go ahead and see what 3/4 is. Do you remember on that other slide? We said that 3/4 was a certain percent. You can look back at it if you want to. But I'm going to go ahead and shade 3/4. So here is one of my 4 pieces. Here is 2 of my 4 pieces. And here is 3 of my 4 pieces. Okay? So let's think about this. If one of my 4 pieces was equal to 25%, right? What would 3 of them be? Hopefully you're doing the math. Hopefully you're saying 75 of those little squares are shaded. Some of you might be saying, well, if 3 of the 4 are shaded, isn't 1/4 not shaded, right? And if you know that 1/4 is 25% or 25 hundredths, then you just kind of take it away from the 100. Maybe some of you didn't follow that. You might want to go back and rewind that and watch that again. Okay, so if 75 out of the 100 squares are shaded, hopefully you're thinking to yourself, well, that's 75% that's shaded, right? Because that's the definition of percent. Per 100, 75%. Okay, so you're sitting there going, Mrs. Anglade, that's pretty easy. In fact, if I were to go back to my percent and fraction chart back here, I don't think there's anything new that we can add, right? 1/4, 25 hundredths, 25%, that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and, because I'm going to give you a new fraction, and that is going to be 1/8. 1/8. Okay. Do you hear my puppy dog back there? He's scratching to find a comfortable place to lay down. He's a mommy's dog, so he wants to lay down. Anyway, okay. So now I want you to think about 8 pieces as compared to 4 pieces. Up on the top, we had 4 pieces here. And now I want to divide this up so that there's 8 equal pieces. This is a toughie. This is a toughie. I want you to think about how are 4 pieces and 8 pieces related. Hopefully you're saying there's twice as many pieces, right? So if I want twice as many pieces, what do I have to do? I have to cut them up twice as many, right? Twice. So what I'm trying to get you to see, and the reason I showed you both ways to do fourths, is hopefully you're saying, what if I cut it into fourths going this way? That's 4 pieces. Now, don't I have to cut each of those pieces in half again? Hope that's what you're saying. So wouldn't you be saying to yourself, let's just cut it on the diagonals? Because remember, fractions are all about fair shares. Is that 8 equal pieces? It is. Now, we could have drawn it. Let me show you another way that we could have drawn it. It would just be hard to see the amounts, and that would be, imagine that that's halfway down. We could have drawn it like this, and by all means, most definitely, we could have done that, and we could have counted. And some of you might like that better. Some of you might like that better. In fact, we could leave it like that if you really wanted to, okay? But just realize that this half of a square and that half of a square make a whole square, okay? So if you want your eighths to be like that, some kids might need to see it like that, okay? But you can also draw it with the diagonals, okay? So I'll take a look at it like this if you're good with it that way. But you know what? I'm going to draw the other 1/8 the other way with the diagonals. So we got another fraction with 1/8. Okay, so in any case, let's take a look at one out of these 8 equal pieces that we have here. So 1 out of the 8, I'm just going to take a look at this. I'm just going to shade it real lightly, okay? So here's my 1/8, right? I want to know how many hundredths did I shade. So you should be counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These two make 11. These two make 12. Oh, ooh. That's a weird fraction. 12 and a half. Nobody said I couldn't do it, so let's just do it, okay? So 12 and a half hundredths, that looks weird as a fraction, but it doesn't look so odd as a percent. 12.5%. Now, you're thinking to yourself, does anybody notice anything? Does anybody notice that 12.5% is half of 25? What's half of 25? I know you're thinking, Mrs. Anglade, it doesn't end in an even number, so it can't divide by 2. Yeah, but we could say that if I took half of 25, it would be 12. And then I could cut up that last one, that remainder of 1, and cut it in half. Right? Do you agree with that? 12 and a half. So each 1/8 of my grid was worth 12 and a half hundredths, or 12.5%. 12.5%. Okay, so go back and rewind that if you need to, because that's really hard for kids to understand sometimes, especially if they have trouble with fractions. All right, on this one though, we're going to do 3/8. And for those of you that kind of get the whole thing of, well, if I know what 1/8 is, I should know what 3/8 is, okay? So you probably, if you understand that, you probably are already saying this to yourself. My lines aren't quite straight with that, but we'll deal with that. All right, I'm going to draw the diagonals this time, okay? Just because I like that better. Okay, so here's my 8 equal pieces, right? And so now what I want is, here's 1/8, and if you don't believe me, that still does equal 12.5%. So let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's 11, here's 12, 12.5. So it does equal. Okay, so here's 1/8, here's 2/8, here's 3/8. How many hundredths do you think we just colored? Well, I don't know about you, but I see 1/4 right here, don't you? Do you see 1/4? Do you see that? Do you see that 1/4 right here? And so this is 1/4, and then here's another 1/8. 1/4 was 25%. I'm just going to jot it down over here. And 1/8 was 12.5%. I wonder what percent 3/8 is, or how many hundredths it is. Is it 37.5 hundredths? That's weird. Fraction in a fraction? That's weird. But what if we just wrote it as a percent? 37.5%, right? Because percent means per 100. All right. So I know that didn't quite make sense to some of you, and we will talk more about it tomorrow in class. But let's go ahead and take a look at the sheet that you have in front of you, that you have in your journal. Let's see how many of these that we can color in. You might need to look back at some of your things that you've done in the past few days. We should know what 1/2 is, right? We're going to try to write as many of these percentages right now that we can. Okay, so we know that 1/2 is 50%. Okay, here's your challenge. I want you to pause this, and I want you to see if you can find any more fractions on this chart that equal 1/2. Because if they equal 1/2, what percent do they equal? Because it's fraction and percent equivalence. Okay, I will give you a clue. There are four other fractions that equal 1/2. When you find them, I want you to write down 50%. Okay, pause it so that when I come back with the answers, you will have it done. Okay. Okay, so I'm back. So you should have found those 4 fractions: 2 4s, 3 6, 4 8s, and 5 10s. I think we put all those fractions in that chart that we made, didn't we? All right, so real quickly, I'm about to run out of time. So let's go ahead and fill in the 1/4 and 3/4. We definitely know that, right? 25%. And we know 3/4 is 75%. And there were 2 other fractions, actually 3 other fractions that we did today. And that was 1/8 was 12.5%. Didn't we say in the last one that this was 2/8 or 1/4? 2/8 or 1/4. So that was 25%. and then I'm gonna run out of time. This was